President Trump and the First Lady arrived in Japan Saturday morning. It's his second visit to the country since he took office. The four-day trip comes as trade tensions between the U.S. and Japan began to simmer. President Trump has threatened to impose stiff tariffs on Japanese cars and parts. The president is expected to speak to the country's leaders about trade and other key issues. He will also meet the country's new emperor. CBS News White House correspondent Ben Tracy is traveling with the president. He has the latest from Tokyo.
President Trump is the first world leader to have a state visit with Japan's new emperor, and this is one more example of this elaborate charm offensive by the Japanese to stay on the good side of the often unpredictable American president. This is President Trump's second visit here since taking office, and the Japanese are once again rolling out the red carpet. On Saturday, the president met with high-profile Japanese business executives. And on Monday, Mr. Trump will be the first world leader to meet Emperor Naruhito, installed last month after his father abdicated the throne due to old age.
The relationship with Japan and the United States, I can say for a fact, has never been stronger. It's never been more powerful, never been closer.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has gone out of his way to woo President Trump. A senior administration official says Trump and Abe have now met or spoken more than 40 times. The prime minister caters to the president's preferences. After a likely golf outing tomorrow, the two leaders are expected to dine on hamburgers. And at a sumo wrestling match this weekend, President Trump will be handing out a so-called Trump trophy to the winner. There's also business to discuss. The president says military and trade issues are on the agenda, which could include Japan agreeing to buy more American military hardware, including F-35 fighter jets. Of course, this is Memorial Day weekend, and here in Japan, President Trump does expect to visit a naval base on Tuesday to greet the troops before he heads back home.
Joining me now is Isaac Stonefish. He's a CBSN contributor and senior fellow of the Asia Society. Isaac, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's just start with the symbolic importance of President Trump being the first world leader to meet Japan's new emperor.
So Prime Minister Abe is and has been very worried about keeping this relationship alive and is really trying to do everything he can to make Trump feel very, very valued, and allowing him to be the first world leader to meet with Japan's new emperor. It's a really nice way of saying, hey, we really value you and we really need you.
Let's talk about the relationship, because President Trump is very close with Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. They've golfed, they've exchanged gifts, they've talked over 40 times. Right. Why is the Prime Minister so intent on keeping him close?
I think he's worried that Trump will revert to some of the views he held in the 80s, which really saw Japan as the trade threat to the United States. And we've seen some of that. For someone who has changed his mind so much, this is a very long-standing view that Japan is really cheating America on trade. And Prime Minister Abe has very intelligently recognized that in order to get Trump to not freak out about trade between the U.S. and Japan, having a really good personal relationship with him is a really strong way to do that.
Well, let's talk about the trade a little bit more, because on Saturday, President Trump mentioned that he hopes a bilateral trade deal with Japan would address the trade imbalance between the two countries. So what does that mean exactly, this trade imbalance?
So Trump and people in the White House believe that if a country exports more to the U.S. than it imports, then the trade is out of whack, and that's bad for the U.S. government. Now, most economists disagree with that and feel that a country's particular imbalance, a trade imbalance with the United States, is not a problem for the United States, but it's long been something that Trump and some of his advisors have felt like is a really large problem. So Trump wants to rectify those trade imbalances and wants it to be that Japan imports as much from the United States as it exports to the United States.
I think a lot of people are wondering, does China play a role in all of this? So with our relationship with them, and how will that affect the trade talks with Japan?
China certainly does play a role. China and Japan are very important trade partners. They're also countries that have had a really contentious history, especially in World War II with the atrocities of the Japanese occupation of parts of China. And for Abe, it's trying to balance his trade relationship with China and the brewing trade war and the issues with the Chinese telecommunications firm Huawei with his desire to not get too close to China so that it'll in any way jeopardize national security, but also at the same time, and this was what makes it so complicated and confusing, to hedge against if trade relations with the United States get worse. So it's a very difficult line that Prime Minister Abe has to walk.
When we saw Ben Tracy's report, there's a lot on that itinerary. And some people might be wondering, is this trip just for show? Are we going to see something real, some real progress come out of here in terms of trade or military trade?
So U.S. and Japanese officials have really tried to manage expectations about this and say this is really a visit to build a better relationship. And I think that's a smart way of selling it to the American and the Japanese public. And if anything does come out of that, that can then be seen as, oh, this is an extra cherry on top of a really lovely relationship, as opposed to, oh, there's no joint statement, there's no really nice tangible deliverable, and then getting criticized for that.
All right, and how about North Korea's nuclear program? Is it casting a shadow over this trip?
So I actually think the recent launch by North Korea has helped the U.S. and Japanese relationship because it allows Japan to get more of what it wants. Japan wants a tougher stance towards North Korea than the president does. And for Japan, it's really about the issue of the abductees. There's been many Japanese citizens, I think it's dozens, who have been abducted by North Korea, especially in the 80s and 90s. It's still a major domestic issue for Japan. Trump is going to go meet with the family of some of those abductees, and this is a really good way for Abe to score some political points at home. So I think in that case, it's working out for them.
All right, it'll be interesting to watch for sure. Isaac Stonefish, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.